The familiar Space Shuttle program is now at rest. NASA plans on launching the Orion spacecraft in 2020. Associate Professor of Physics and Astrophysics Wayne Barkhouse has insight on the plans to return to space. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I have to ask, why the interest in space?
Well, it's something I've been interested in since I was in kindergarten, and actually I have proof of that. I have a picture of myself standing in front of a poster showing the Apollo capsule landing in the ocean. And so I know my interest. I can remember that actually date before that, so probably at the age of 3 or 4 or so.
Sure, and now here you are talking about it now, which is great. Yeah. Why do we invest so much into space travel?
And so it's very important. I mean, for example, the latest example, you think of Hurricane Sandy, and so be able to do the accurate forecasting that we need to give people a long time in order to prepare to do evacuations and that sort of thing. You really can do that best by having weather satellites in orbit. So that's just one small part of the space program that's extremely valuable and worth the money that we put into it every year.
Okay. Well, it's safe to say the shuttle is dead. Mm-hmm. What's next?
So presently NASA has plans to launch what's called the Space Launch System. So in some sense it's going back a little bit to the Apollo program when we landed men on the moon. And so it's Saturn V-like in terms of the capability of the rocket. It's a little bit more powerful than the Saturn V. It can launch a little bit heavier payload into orbit and beyond Earth orbit. But the idea is to go beyond the orbit that the shuttle usually went to, that is low Earth orbit, and finally go into places such as asteroids, to land on those, or at least nearby the asteroid, and sort of see what it's all about in terms of the composition or makeup. Eventually go on to Mars, and maybe even returning to the moon in sort of intermediate step.
Okay, and this is a rocket, right, that we're talking about. You know, we started with rockets, then we moved to the shuttle design, and going back, this is a mock-up picture of what it's going to look like. What are the advantages of the rocket?
Yeah, so one of the problems that we discovered was the way the shuttle design ended up being in its final form was not quite as safe as what we had liked. And so as everyone knows, we lost 2 of the shuttles. The Apollo program and the Saturn V was actually a little safer in the sense of the way the design was with the rocket. You had an escape system set up on the top of the capsule. They can actually lift you away from the rocket if the rocket itself was having a problem that was going to blow up, you know, in a few seconds later sort of thing. So it gave you a built-in redundancy in terms of safety. We didn't have quite that in for the shuttle program, but the shuttle was really designed to be reusable and to be cost-effective. And so the idea was to launch a rocket instead of throwing it away at the end, to return it to the Earth and then send it up again once you refurbish it. The problem was NASA was too optimistic. They thought they could turn the shuttle around every week or so. And if you fly a lot of flights, that reduces the cost per flight. But in practicality, that didn't work.
Sure. And, you know, looking at the design, it looks, like I said, back in the 60s we had rockets and we were going into space. You think of the difference in technology from the 60s to now. Are we keeping up with the space exploration part of that as well, of the increase in technology? Are we in step with everything else, like cell phones and the rest of it?
Right. Actually, the structure of the rocket looks very similar to Saturn V, but actually the heart of it is a lot different. The main engines that would power the rocket, for example, are derived from the shuttle program. So they are advanced technology and high-performance engines. And we also developed for the first time in many, many years a liquid-fueled rocket specifically for this program. That's the J2X engine that will power the upper stage, for example, the second stage of the rocket. So we are using the latest, greatest technology and trying to get more payload up, you know, and into low Earth orbit, for example.
Okay. Now, it used to be a space race. Is it still that way, or is it more collaboration between countries?
Well, the space race itself was really politics. It was developed in the Cold War, and it was strictly between the Soviet Union and the United States. Now it's sort of open, and there's a lot of private organizations that are getting involved. You might have heard of the SpaceX recent launch, the Dragon capsule to the International Space Station. And so there are private entrepreneurs that are getting involved in developing these rocket systems, and they're doing it for a profit. A company does it for profit. They don't do it for the research and development type of thing. Their goal, of course, is to make money. And so the idea is that these private companies can actually get us into low Earth orbit, for example, a lot cheaper than what government-sponsored agencies can do. And so that's the hope. So a combination of private to sort of satisfy supplies the International Space Station, and NASA to push the envelope in exploring deep space.
Well, and you talk about the cost. Why is it worth it?
Well, it's worth in a sense, if you can just think of the grandiose idea, and there's lots of practicalities in terms of weather forecasting. Our GPS system is all based on having satellites in orbit, for example. But if you can think and lay back and philosophize, if you like, for a second, I mean, we have built into ourselves wonder of the universe around us. And for example, who wouldn't want to peek over the crest of a hill on Mars to see what's there? All these sort of notions. It's built in to explore things which are unknown. And so that is sort of a driving, a motivation factor that's always ingrained into us. It's whether or not society will accept it. That's another thing, because of course these things cost money. So.
I have to ask you one last question.
Mm-hmm.
If you could jump on a rocket, would you go to space?
Definitely.
And why?
Because it's a new enterprise. It's exciting. It's a new adventure. And how often would someone say to you, would you like to go in space? Here's an opportunity. It's not going to happen very often, not in our lifetime. So.
All right, Wayne, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.